Hey there, tonight we're diving into the tantalizing world of medieval junk food, where the truth is, medieval peasants snacked on fried dough and cheese balls long before your favorite Renaissance fair discovered them. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. Medieval towns were the original foodie festivals, minus the Instagram filters and plus a lot more grit and grime. Picture a bustling market square in the heart of 14th century London, where the air is thick with the aroma of roasting meats and the occasional whiff of something less appetizing. The streets are peppered with vendors hawking their wares, shouting louder than a town crier on market day. Among them, you'll find the medieval rock stars of the culinary world, the street vendors. These folks were the original fast food icons, slinging out treats that could make even the most devout monk consider breaking Lent early. Now, let's talk about the medieval equivalent of a drive-through menu. The piece de resistance of this era's fast food was none other than the humble meat pie. Forget about today's flaky gourmet versions. Medieval meat pies were hardy, often questionable in content, and wrapped in a thick crust that could double as a makeshift plate. These pies were filled with whatever meat was available, from beef to pigeon. Yes, pigeon. And if you were really lucky, you might even get a surprise ingredient or two. Because when it comes to medieval cooking, who doesn't love a good mystery? The appeal of these portable meals was clear: convenience. Whether you were a peasant with a plough to push or a noble with a penchant for jousting, meat pie was the ultimate grab-and-go snack. Plus, at just a few farthings, around the equivalent of a couple of bucks today, these pies were a steal, especially when your other option was a sit-down meal that could take hours and involve more forks than you could count. But meat pies were just the beginning. Enter the fritters, deep-fried delights that could give modern-day churros a run for their money. These crispy treats were made by dropping batter, often sweetened with honey or dried fruit, into hot oil. And speaking of oil, let's just say the concept of changing it regularly was a touch foreign. So there you have it, the medieval precursor to your favorite greasy fairground fare. Now, before you start romanticizing these medieval street snacks as the quaint predecessors of today's fast food, let's unpack a few less than appetizing truths. First off, hygiene standards were about as low as you could get without actually digging into the dirt. Food was often prepared and served in the open air, alongside animal droppings and the ever-present dust of the bustling streets. Vendors didn't exactly have a 5-star health rating. Their kitchens were more likely to be swarming with flies than Michelin inspectors. And yet, they were incredibly popular, offering a cheap and accessible meal to anyone with a few coins to spare. But why, you ask, were these street foods so wildly popular, even among the nobility? You can thank the economics of the time. You see, medieval Europe was a place where the division of labor was becoming more pronounced. As towns grew, so did the demand for quick, easy meals that could be consumed on the go. Nobles might have had kitchens with more staff than a modern restaurant, but even they couldn't resist the allure of a hot, ready-to-eat meal after a long day of attending court or overseeing their estates. Moreover, during times of scarcity or poor harvests, street food vendors often had a steadier supply of ingredients than the average household. This made them an essential part of urban life, providing not just sustenance but a sense of community in the bustling chaos of medieval cities. And if that meant occasionally biting into something that tasted more like mystery than meat, well, it was all part of the medieval dining experience. So, there you have it, the gritty, greasy, yet oddly charming world of medieval street food. It was a time when grabbing a quick bite meant literally risking a bite from something unexpected. The next time you're enjoying a fast food meal, spare a thought for those medieval munchers chowing down on meat pies and fritters, blissfully unaware of the culinary revolution that was centuries away. And speaking of culinary revolutions, let's dive into the sweet side of medieval munching, where sugar, spices, and scandalously sticky fingers meet. That's right, we're talking about medieval confections and desserts. If you thought the medieval palate was all about savory pies and greasy fritters, think again. These folks had a sweet tooth that could rival any modern sugar fiend. First up, let's chat about honey cakes. A favorite among the sweet treats, honey cakes were the medieval answer to a sugar craving in a world where sugar was still playing hard to get. Imagine a dense, golden cake, rich with the floral notes of honey, perhaps spiced with a hint of cinnamon or cloves. These cakes weren't just for the rich. They were a treat for everyone, although the quality varied wildly depending on your station in life. If you were a peasant, your honey cake might be more rustic, reed, a bit burnt and crumbly. But hey, beggars can't be choosers. Now, honey was the sweetener of choice in medieval Europe, long before sugar muscled its way onto the scene. But when sugar finally did arrive, it made quite a splash. We're talking about a substance so precious that it was often larked away like a family heirloom. Picture this. Sugar was once sold in solid, conical loaves, and you'd need a special set of snips just to chip off enough to sweeten your tea. That is, if you were wealthy enough to afford sugar and tea in the first place. Enter sugar-coated almonds, the medieval equivalent of candy-coated happiness. These little delights were the go-to treat for celebrations, weddings, and any occasion where you wanted to impress your guests without breaking the bank, assuming you were one of the lucky few who could actually afford sugar. A pound of sugar in the 14th century could set you back a whopping 2 shillings, which might not sound like much until you realize that's about 2 days' wages for a skilled craftsman. So, sugar was less a pantry staple and more a status symbol. Now, let's address a common misconception. Sugar was exclusive, but it wasn't entirely out of reach for the average Joe. As trade routes expanded and sugar became more widely available, it trickled down the social ladder, sweetening the lives of those who could afford the occasional indulgence. By the 15th century, sugar had gone from exotic luxury to something you might find at a medieval street fair, albeit in modest quantities. But what did this newfound love of sugar mean for our medieval friends' dental health? Spoiler alert, it wasn't pretty. Imagine a world without toothbrushes, toothpaste, or even the concept of dental hygiene. Enter the medieval dentist's nightmare, a mouthful of sweet, sugary confections, and no real way to clean up the mess. Dental care in the Middle Ages was about as advanced as bloodletting, which, yes, was still a thing. Tooth decay was rampant, with blackened stumps often standing in for actual teeth. Yet sugar's allure was undeniable, and its impact on society was profound. It became a catalyst for change, a sweet disruptor, if you will. As sugar became more accessible and desirable, it fueled exploration and trade, helping to connect distant parts of the world through a shared craving for sweetness. The sugar rush wasn't just a culinary phenomenon. It was an economic and social game changer. Well, there you have it, the sweet side of medieval snacking, a world where honey cakes and sugar-coated almonds tantalized taste buds and shaped economies. While sugar may have started as a luxury reserved for the elite, it eventually trickled down, leaving its mark on society in more ways than one. And as we continue to unravel the sticky, sugary threads of history, remember, behind every mouthful of medieval confection lies a story of innovation, exploration, and yes, a little bit of tooth decay. Ah, the sweet disruptor that was sugar, spicing up medieval life like a cheeky plot twist in an otherwise predictable saga. But while sugar was busy reshaping palates and driving global trade, its savory counterpart, medieval street food, was undergoing its own transformation, fueled by political wrangling, social hierarchies, and of course, the occasional bout of chaos that makes history oh so entertaining. First, let's set the stage. Medieval Europe, a continent teeming with bustling towns and cities where markets were the beating heart of daily life. These weren't just places to buy a loaf of bread or haggle over a hunk of cheese. They were the social media of their time, where news traveled faster than a sprinter at the Olympics. Markets were strictly regulated zones, overseen by local authorities who were about as fun-loving as a tax auditor. They set the rules. Woe betide any vendor who dared to cross them. Enter the guilds, those medieval powerhouses that controlled nearly every aspect of trade, and yes, that included food. Guilds were the original club you wanted to be part of, but membership came with a price. They were responsible for maintaining quality and consistency, which is a polite way of saying they had a stranglehold on prices and supply. Want to sell a meat pie? Better be a card-carrying member of the Bakers Guild, or you might find your stall mysteriously out of commission by morning. And let's not forget the feast days, a term that makes you think of joyous celebration, but often translated to logistical nightmares. These grand events were like the medieval equivalent of Black Friday, with a dash of Mardi Gras chaos thrown in for good measure. They were opportunities for culinary extravagance, where the streets transformed into a gourmand's paradise, if you had the coin. Feast days could turn a sleepy town into a heaving mass of humanity, with vendors cashing in on the throngs of people looking to spend their hard-earned farthings on something more exciting than their usual gruel. However, the romanticized view of these festivals as harmonious celebrations of abundance, pure fantasy. In reality, these gatherings were like a powder keg waiting for a match. An influx of people meant more mouths to feed, more waste, and more chances for things to go spectacularly wrong. Food politics were a thing, and they could get ugly. Imagine the chaos of trying to maintain order when vendors inflated prices at the sight of a crowd, or when the local lord decided to commandeer the best cuts of meat for his own table, leaving the scraps for the masses. But why, you might wonder, were these festivals such a big deal? It all comes down to the medieval love affair with spectacle and status. Feast days weren't just about gorging yourself silly. They were about showing off. They were about the display of wealth, power, and generosity, or at least the appearance of it. For the nobility, it was a chance to flaunt their resources, to be the medieval equivalent of a social media influencer, flexing their ability to throw a party that people would talk about for weeks. The sheer scale of these celebrations often meant that the quality of street food took a nosedive. When you're feeding a crowd the size of a small army, corners are cut. The guilds, for all their control, couldn't keep up, and vendors would sometimes resort to more creative interpretations of what constituted fine dining. This led to a culinary landscape that was as unpredictable as the weather, a feast one moment, a famine the next. And let's not ignore the mess. Picture a festival aftermath. The streets littered with discarded bones, the stench of spoiled food mingling with the ever-present aroma of unwashed bodies. Not exactly the stuff of fairy tales, is it? But in this gritty reality, there was a bizarre charm. These festivals were a testament to human resilience, the ability to find joy and connection amidst the chaos. So, while the idea of medieval festivals as idyllic gatherings is certainly appealing, the truth is far more complex and fascinating. They were a microcosm of medieval society itself, full of contradictions and contrasts. The next time you find yourself at a modern-day festival, grumbling about the prices or the line for the food truck, remember the medieval revelers who navigated a world of food politics and feast-day pandemonium. Behind the veneer of celebration was a battleground of economic interests and social dynamics, proving once again that history is never as simple as it seems. As we continue our culinary journey through medieval Europe, keep in mind that every market stall, every pie vendor, and every festival feast tells a story of power, survival, and the endless quest for a good meal. And remember, the past, with all its gritty realities and untold tales, is just as rich and flavorful as the present, if not more. So, as we wade deeper into the medieval kitchen, let's take a culinary tour across Europe, where junk food was as varied as the languages spoken. If you've ever believed that medieval cuisine was a monolithic affair, prepare to have that notion skewered like a spit-roast pig at a village fair. Let's kick things off in Germany, where sausages weren't just a way to stretch meat during lean times. They were practically a culinary art form. Enter the Nuremberg bratwurst, a sausage so iconic it had its own set of laws. That's right, a medieval sausage with legal protection. These sausages had to be made within the city limits and measured no longer than the palm of your hand, about 3 to 4 inches. Talk about strict portion control, but why the fuss? Well, in a time when meat preservation was as hit or miss as a medieval crossbow, sausages were a brilliant way to use up scraps and spices to mask any, shall we say, questionable flavors. And thanks to Germany's extensive trade routes, spices like pepper and nutmeg were often thrown into the mix, giving these meaty morsels a kick that kept folks coming back for more. Now, hop across the English Channel, and you'll find the Brits getting creative with their own brand of medieval junk food, fried fish. Long before it got cozy with chips, fried fish was the snack of choice for those wandering the foggy streets of London. Picture this, a hunk of fish, likely herring or cod, dipped in a batter that was less tempera and more let's see what sticks, then tossed into a vat of boiling oil. The result, a crispy, golden treat that was a far cry from the refined fish dishes gracing noble tables. This street food staple was born out of necessity, a way to make the most of the day's catch before it went bad, which, in those days, was about as likely as the sun setting in the west. And where did this frying technique come from? Some credit it to Jewish immigrants who brought the method over from the Iberian Peninsula, proving once again that good food knows no borders. Speaking of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal were the original fusion food capitals, long before anyone thought to slap the word fusion on a menu to justify a $1.20 taco. Thanks to centuries of Moorish rule, the medieval kitchen was a melting pot of flavors, where cinnamon, saffron, and almonds danced together like a culinary flamenco. Take the humble churro, for instance. Though its origins are as tangled as the treat itself, it's a prime example of how culinary influences blend. While some say it was inspired by yuxiao, a Chinese fried dough brought back by Portuguese sailors, others argue it was a Moorish invention. Either way, by the late Middle Ages, it was a popular street snack, dusted with sugar and perfect for dipping into thick, rich chocolate. Sweet, spicy, and a little bit mysterious. Sounds like a perfect metaphor for medieval Spain itself. Meanwhile, the French, ever the culinary innovators, were busy perfecting their own street fare. Enter the galette, a rustic, flat cake that was the medieval precursor to the crepe. Made from buckwheat flour, these savory pancakes were a staple in Brittany, a region known for its rugged coastline and hardy appetites. Unlike the delicate crepes we know today, medieval galettes were robust, often topped with whatever was on hand. Think cheese, eggs, or even a bit of salted pork. And let's not forget the medieval French love affair with cheese, which was practically a national pastime. Fromage blanc, a fresh, soft cheese, was a popular topping, adding a creamy richness to the humble galette that even the most discerning medieval palate couldn't resist. Now, let's travel east to Italy, where the pizza's ancestor was making waves in the bustling markets of Naples. Before the tomato had even set foot on European soil, flatbreads topped with olive oil, herbs, and the occasional anchovy or two were all the rage. These proto-pizzas were a poor man's feast, affordable and filling, perfect for a quick lunch while navigating the chaos of a medieval market. And when tomatoes finally arrived from the New World, they turned this simple street food into the iconic dish we know today. But that's a tale for another time. As we wrap up our whirlwind tour of medieval Europe's street food scene, it's clear that geography and trade routes played a massive role in shaping local flavors. From the spicy sausages of Germany to the fried fish of England, each region had its own take on junk food, influenced by the ingredients available and the cultures that passed through. And while the idea of medieval cuisine might conjure images of bland, boiled fare, the reality was far more vibrant and diverse. But let's not romanticize it too much. For every culinary triumph, there was a disaster lurking just around the corner. Ingredients were often swapped or stretched beyond recognition, and what one culture might consider a delicacy, another might deem inedible. These culinary exchanges weren't always smooth. Imagine the shock of a French noble biting into a spicy German sausage, or an English merchant puzzling over a churro. Yet, despite the occasional misunderstandings, these exchanges laid the groundwork for the rich tapestry of European cuisine we enjoy today. So, next time you're savoring a spicy bratwurst, or enjoying a plate of fish and chips, give a nod to the medieval cooks who, through trial and error, and sometimes sheer accident, crafted the flavors we still relish. Their kitchens may have been smoky and chaotic, but they were buzzing with innovation and a spirit of experimentation that transcended borders. As we continue our journey through the annals of culinary history, remember that the flavors of the past are much like the people who created them, complex, surprising, and never quite what you expect. Stay tuned, because our gastronomic time travel isn't over yet. There's still a world of medieval delights to explore, and who knows, we might just uncover a few more surprises along the way. As we dive headfirst into the final course of our medieval culinary tour, let's chew on the legacy of these ancient snacks. You see, medieval junk food wasn't just a collection of greasy, questionable treats. It was the appetizer to today's global street food smorgasbord. If those medieval munchers could see us now, they'd probably be amazed, and maybe a little envious, at how their humble pies and fritters have evolved into the slick, Instagrammable bites of the 21st century. Consider the meat pie. Once upon a time, it was a medieval staple, filled with whatever mystery meat was on hand. Fast forward to today, and you'll find its descendants gracing menus around the world, from the gourmet beef Wellington to the humble Cornish pasty. The crust has gotten flakier, the fillings more luxurious, but the core appeal remains the same. A portable, satisfying meal that fits neatly in your hand. And let's not forget the economic ingenuity behind it. Turning scraps into sustenance is a practice as old as time, and a testament to human resourcefulness. Then there's the fried fish of medieval London, the precursor to the beloved fish and chips. This dish may have started as a practical solution to preserving the catch of the day, but it has since become a national icon, representing comfort and nostalgia. The batter's crunch and the fish's tender flakiness are a culinary love story centuries in the making. And let's face it, nothing says British cuisine quite like wrapping your dinner in yesterday's news. And just as the medieval market stalls were brimming with churro-like confections, today's food festivals are awash with deep-fried delights that would make a friar blush. The churro, with its Moorish roots and Portuguese twists, has become a global sensation, dipped in chocolate or sprinkled with cinnamon sugar. It encapsulates the idea that good food transcends borders and time, a sweet reminder that sometimes the best dishes come from the most unexpected places. But beyond the flavors and aromas, medieval street food tells a story of social and economic dynamics that still resonate today. Back then, these quick bites weren't just about sustenance. They were about survival in a rapidly changing world. Urbanization was on the rise, and with it came the need for meals that were fast, affordable, and filling. Sound familiar? It's the same driving force behind today's fast food industry, where convenience is king and time is always of the essence. Whether it's a medieval pie or a modern-day burger, the goal remains the same. Feed the masses quickly and effectively. And what about the guilds, those medieval gatekeepers of quality and pricing? Today's food industry has its own version in the form of regulation and branding. Think about the strict standards governing products like champagne or Parmigiano Reggiano. These modern-day guilds ensure that quality and tradition are maintained, a direct line from the medieval markets to the grocery stores of today. But let's not sugarcoat it, quite literally. The arrival of sugar transformed medieval eating habits and set the stage for the sugary snacks that fill our shelves now. Sugar was the medieval disruptor, a harbinger of change that turned desserts into a status symbol and fueled the trade routes that connected continents. Today, sugar is ubiquitous, perhaps too much so, but its journey from a rare luxury to an everyday staple mirrors the democratization of indulgence. Now, let's get real for a moment. While it's easy to romanticize the idea of medieval markets as quaint, bustling centers of gastronomic delight, the truth was often far less glamorous. Hygiene was dubious at best, and the risk of foodborne illness loomed large. The next time you bite into your sanitized, neatly packaged street food, bear a thought for those who risked it all for a taste of the latest medieval fad. Their stomachs and immune systems were the true pioneers. In the end, the legacy of medieval junk food is one of resilience, adaptation, and the timeless human desire for something delicious, fast, and maybe a little indulgent. It's a legacy that has shaped not only our palates, but our economies and cultures. From the cobbled streets of medieval Europe to the bustling food trucks of today, the craving for quick, tasty food remains a constant in the human story. So, as you finish your fast food meal or savor a piping hot churro, remember that you're part of a tradition stretching back centuries. A tradition born out of necessity, fueled by innovation, and carried forward by the universal human love for a good, satisfying bite. History may be written by the victors, but it's eaten by everyone. And if that isn't food for thought, I don't know what is. Before the sun even peeks over the horizon, you're already feeling the buzz of Ur, your home city, and the most happening place in 2100 BC Mesopotamia. The air is thick with the promise of deals to be made and goods to be exchanged. You're not just a trader here. You're a vital cog in the complex machinery of ancient commerce that keeps this whole society running. And you haven't even had your morning beer yet. Yep, that's how you roll in Sumer. Forget coffee. A good cup of barley brew is what gets you going. You kick off your day with a pilgrimage of sorts, not to a shrine or sacred grove, but to the ziggurat towering over the city. This isn't your average religious pit stop, mind you. Picture a multi-layered, terraced pyramid that serves as both a temple to the god Nana and a bustling center of economic activity. You're about to dive into a world where the divine and the mundane are as intertwined as your sandal straps. The ziggurat isn't just a monument to spirituality. It's the Wall Street of ancient minus the suits and ties. As you make your way through the dusty streets, you're surrounded by the sounds of merchants setting up stalls and artisans hammering away at their crafts. The air is filled with the aroma of baked bread and the less appealing but ever-present scent of livestock. You're not just here for the ambience, you're on a mission. Your first stop is to check out the latest clay tablets at the temple archive. These tablets are like the Excel spreadsheets of the ancient world, tracking every shekel spent and every grain of barley traded. They're not exactly user-friendly, no color-coded columns here, but they do the trick. The Sumerians have mastered the art of bureaucracy. Your ancestors weren't content with just a handshake and a verbal agreement. Oh no, they needed everything chiseled into clay. Literally. You can't help but marvel, or maybe roll your eyes, at the sheer number of scribes hunched over their work, scratching out the details of every transaction. If there's anything that rivals the ziggurat in complexity, it's the Sumerian trade network. And you're smack dab in the middle of it, a trader with connections stretching from to the far reaches of the Indus Valley. That's a jaw-dropping one, 500 miles away, give or take a few sandy deserts. Your role is more than just a middleman. You're a global connector in a time when the concept of global is still in its infancy. Each transaction, each trade deal, is a small thread in the massive tapestry of commerce that links the known world. You've got lapis lazuli coming in from Afghanistan, copper from Oman, and that's just the start. It's not just about exotic goods, it's about maintaining relationships, alliances, and sometimes rivalries. Even in 2100 BC, it's who you know that counts. Wandering through the ziggurat's courtyard, you see traders haggling over everything from textiles to livestock, each trying to get the upper hand without giving away too much. You join in, bartering a batch of fine wool for some of that sweet, sweet Indus Valley carnelian. Your mind is a constant swirl of numbers and possibilities. How many shekels per kana of grain? How much copper you need to balance your books? But it's not all spreadsheets and sunburns. There's a certain romance to it, a sense of being part of something larger than yourself, even if it means occasionally getting shortchanged by a shifty merchant. As the sun climbs higher, casting a golden glow over the mud-brick city, you can't help but appreciate the madness and majesty of it all. This is your world. It's messy, it's vibrant, and it's very much alive. You're not just living in history. You're making it, one trade at a time. The ziggurat stands as a testament to that. Part temple, part trading hub, all Sumerian ingenuity. It's a place where the sacred and the secular dance together, and you're right there in the thick of it, trading with the best of them. With the morning's business wrapped up, you take a moment to soak it all in. The ziggurat looms above you, a constant reminder of the divine powers at play. Yet it's also a symbol of human achievement, of what can be accomplished when people come together to trade, worship, and build a civilization. It's humbling, really. You're just one person in this grand tapestry, but what a tapestry it is, woven with threads of commerce, culture, and the occasional beer-induced epiphany. And with that, you're ready to tackle the next part of your day, because in there's always another deal to be made, another story to be told. With the morning's business wrapped up, you take a moment to soak it all in. But wait, hold your horses, or should I say, hold your donkeys, since we're in Sumeria, because the real show is about to begin. The marketplace is calling, a writhing mass of humanity that makes your morning maneuverings look like a stroll down a quiet lane. Here, the air is thick with the scent of ambition, and let's be honest, a hint of chaos. Traders from every corner of the known world. Okay, maybe not every corner, since the world was a tad smaller back then, congregate here, each with their own agenda, goods, and a healthy dose of haggling spirit. You're not just a lone ranger in this bustling scene. Look around, and you'll spot familiar faces. Akkadians with their woolen textiles, Amorites peddling livestock, and even some entrepreneurial Egyptians hawking linen. But what catches your eye today is a group of merchants from the distant Indus Valley, easily recognizable by their distinct attire and the carnelian beads they are fond of trading. The stuff glimmers like it's got its own internal power source, and trust me, it's the bling everyone wants to flaunt. These traders have journeyed over 500 miles, and yet they still manage to look more put together than you do after a day in the market. Now, let's talk currency, or the lack thereof. In this world, the term cash flow would probably get you a blank stare. The Sumerian economy is a strange beast, a hybrid of bartering and currency exchange that would make modern accountants break out in a cold sweat. Silver shekels are the closest thing to money, and they're weighed rather than counted. Just imagine paying for your groceries by weighing your wallet at the checkout. But silver isn't always handy, so bartering remains king. You could trade a jar of date syrup for a bushel of barley, or strike a deal with lapis lazuli that wouldn't look out of place in a modern art collection. Speaking of prized goods, the marketplace has its own hierarchy. Barley, the staple crop, is the bread and butter, literally and figuratively, of the Sumerian diet. Then there's wool, the backbone of Sumerian fashion, which is as essential as your favorite pair of jeans. But lapis lazuli, oh boy, that's a different league. This blue rock from Afghanistan is the ancient world's version of a designer handbag. Expensive, exclusive, and a must-have if you want to make a splash at the next ziggurat soiree. Amidst all this wheeling and dealing, you stumble upon a trader waving a clay tablet like it's a winning lottery ticket. Turns out, it's the Mesopotamian equivalent of a one-star Yelp review. The tablet is inscribed with a complaint about a subpar batch of wheat, as in, "Dear supplier, this wheat is more chaff than grain. Kindly stop selling us your leftovers." The Sumerians, it seems, were pioneers in the art of consumer feedback, long before online forums were around to vent your frustrations. Imagine having to chisel your rants into clay, talk about commitment to the cause. Now, if you think this world of trade is an exclusive boys' club, think again. Women in Sumer are more involved than you might expect, and not just behind the scenes. In fact, some of them are leading traders in their own right, handling everything from textiles to grain. One notable figure is Kubaba, a tavern keeper turned ruler, whose business acumen was so legendary that she ended up being deified. That's right. She went from pouring beer to being worshipped as a goddess, a career path that's probably not covered in your typical business school curriculum. The role of women in trade isn't just a quirky footnote, it's a crucial part of the economic tapestry. Women manage household economies, oversee transactions, and sometimes even serve as scribes. They're a vital part of the machinery that keeps this ancient world turning, and they're not shy about making their presence felt. In a society that worships fertility goddesses alongside warrior deities, the line between domesticity and commerce is as blurred as the riverbanks of the Tigris after a flood. As you navigate this chaotic bazaar, the sun high overhead, you can't help but marvel at the sheer complexity of it all. The marketplace is a living organism, a microcosm of Sumerian society that reflects its values, its ambitions, and its contradictions. Here, in the midst of bartered goods and shouted deals, you see the push and pull of civilization itself. It's a place where cultures collide, where fortunes are made and lost, and where the pulse of commerce beats ever onward. And as the day winds on, you're reminded that this marketplace, with its cacophony of voices and clash of cultures, is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Every trader, every artisan, every market-goer is a thread in this vast tapestry, each playing their part in the grand drama of history. You, my friend, are right in the thick of it, part of a story that continues to unfold with every deal struck and every handshake sealed. Now, as the sun begins to dip, casting long shadows over the marketplace, it's time to wrap up this chapter and prepare for what the next day will bring in the ever-turning wheel of Sumerian trade. As the sun begins its lazy descent, casting long shadows over the bustling marketplace, you decide it's time to hit the road, or rather, the river. Welcome to the Euphrates, your ancient freeway and the Sumerian lifeline. This mighty river snakes its way through the heart of Mesopotamia, connecting cities like a watery thread in a dusty tapestry. Forget highways and byways. The Euphrates is where the real action is. Now, let's talk logistics. In 3rd millennium BC Mesopotamia, donkeys are your semi-trucks, and their hooves are pounding the mud-brick roads like it's rush hour. These beasts of burden are the unsung heroes of the trading world, hauling everything from barley to bricks. They might not have the horsepower of a modern engine, but they get the job done, and without guzzling gas. Instead, they munch on hay, which, let's face it, is a lot more eco-friendly. But let's not forget the roads, or the lack thereof. The Sumerians, Picture a network of dirt paths that make the I-95 look like a dream. These mud brick lanes are the arteries of Sumer, and they are as unpredictable as they are essential. One good rain, and you've got a sludgy mess that'll bog down even the most determined donkey. The Sumerians, though, are nothing if not resilient. They've mastered the art of navigation in this landscape, and their ingenuity shows in every stamped-down path. The real piece de resistance of Sumerian transport, though, is the wheel. Yes, the wheel, one of humanity's most game-changing inventions. Before this, dragging goods around meant, well, dragging them. But with the wheel, suddenly you're in business. Imagine carts loaded with goods rolling smoothly, or as smoothly as ancient wheels allow, along the riverbanks. It's like adding turbo boost to your donkey caravan. And then there's the sail. The Sumerians were early adopters of this technology, transforming their wooden boats into wind-powered vessels. This isn't just a cool party trick, it's a revolution in trade. With sails catching the breeze, traders can cover more ground, or water in this case, faster than ever before. Suddenly, distant lands don't feel so distant, and the world opens up like a giant oyster, ready to be plundered for its pearls. Speaking of distance, let's address the elephant, or the donkey in the room, the geopolitical chess game of city-states. Each Sumerian city is its own little kingdom, complete with its own king, its own guards, and its own agenda. They're like a frenemies club, always jockeying for position and power. Today's ally could be tomorrow's rival, and the trade routes are the chessboard where these moves play out. The city-states of Uruk, and Lagash are the big players, each vying for dominance, and each trying to control the lucrative trade routes that crisscross the region. Did someone say drama? Because there's plenty of it. These city-states might share a language and a culture, but when it comes to trade, it's every city for itself. They're like siblings in a never-ending squabble, each trying to outdo the other while borrowing each other's toys. Now, here's the kicker. This cutthroat competition is both a curse and a blessing. On one hand, it leads to constant conflict and the occasional skirmish. On the other hand, it drives innovation and keeps the trade routes buzzing with activity. It's a delicate balance that keeps the wheels of commerce and those donkey carts rolling. And what about you, the intrepid trader navigating this world? You're not just a pawn in this game. You're a player, maneuvering through the shifting alliances and rivalries. You know that one wrong move could cost you a fortune, but a smart deal could make your career. It's high-stakes poker, ancient style, and the Euphrates is your casino. As you trek along the river, you pass bustling docks and busy market towns, each one a hive of activity. Goods are loaded and unloaded, deals are struck, and the air is thick with the scent of opportunity. You see everything from amphorae of olive oil to bundles of wool, all bound for distant markets. It's a living, breathing testament to human ambition and enterprise. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The romance of the open road, or river, isn't without its harsh realities. Bandits lurk in the shadows, ready to relieve unwary traders of their goods. And then there are the customs officials, each with their hand out for a piece of the pie. It's a world where you have to keep your wits about you and your silver shekels close. Yet despite the risks, the rewards are undeniable. Every successful journey, every profitable trade, is a step closer to prosperity. You're part of a grand tradition, one that stretches back into the mists of time and forward into the future. It's a story of human ingenuity, of the relentless pursuit of progress, and of the eternal dance between risk and reward. So as you walk along the banks of the Euphrates, with the sun setting behind you and the road stretching out ahead, you know that this is where you're meant to be. It's not just a journey, it's an adventure, one that's as old as civilization itself. And as the stars begin to twinkle in the night sky, you're ready to embrace whatever tomorrow brings, because in Sumer, the only constant is change, and the only limit is how far you're willing to go. As you wander along the Euphrates, with the stars beginning to flicker in the evening sky, you can't help but think about the darker undercurrents flowing beneath all this trade and commerce. Because let's face it, even in the cradle of civilization, not everything is sunshine and lapis lazuli. The world of Sumerian trade, as bustling and vibrant as it is, has its own shadowy corners. First up on this tour of ancient troubles, slavery. The Sumerians weren't just trading goods, they were trading people too. Slavery was as much a part of the economic machine as barley and wool. Captives from wars or those who fell into debt could find themselves sold into servitude faster than you could say Euphrates. But before you imagine a scene out of a sword and sandal epic, Let's get real. Slaves in Sumer could sometimes own property and even buy their freedom. It wasn't all shackles and whips, though that doesn't make the practice any less grim. Now, let's talk about that pesky little thing called taxation. You thought the IRS was a headache? Try navigating the labyrinth of Sumerian taxes. Every transaction, whether it involved a jug of olive oil or a herd of sheep, was subject to some form of tax. The Sumerians had a knack for administration that would make modern-day accountants weep tears of envy. They devised a system where taxes were collected in kind, grains, livestock, or whatever else you had to offer. Picture paying your taxes with a bushel of barley. It sounds quaint until you realize the sheer logistics of storing all that cereal. And speaking of logistics, let's dig into a cornerstone of Sumerian law, the Code of Ur-Nammu. Written around 2100 BC, this is one of the earliest recorded legal codes. It laid down the law in no uncertain terms, dealing with everything from murder to marriage. For traders like you, it was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided a measure of protection, an eye for an eye and all that. On the other hand, it also meant that disputes over trade and debt were settled with a cold, hard chisel. Literally. These laws were inscribed on clay tablets, ready to be consulted by anyone who could decipher the cuneiform script. The code wasn't just about crimes and punishments, though. It also touched on commerce and property rights, ensuring that the wheels of trade kept turning smoothly. It's easy to romanticize this as a golden age of justice, but let's not forget the realities. The law was often as much about protecting the interests of the elite as it was about maintaining social order. The rich and powerful had the law on their side more often than not, leaving the average trader to navigate this legal maze with caution. And then there's debt. Debt, the eternal bane of traders everywhere. The Sumerians were well acquainted with the concept, and their approach to it was as pragmatic as it was harsh. Fall behind on your payments, and you might find yourself or your family members sold into slavery to cover the balance. It's a sobering thought, especially when you consider that debt wasn't just a financial issue. It was a social one, affecting your status and reputation in the community. In a world where everything was interconnected, falling into debt could mean falling out of favor, and that was a fate no one wanted. Now, let's bust some myths about the wealth of Sumer. It's tempting to think of Sumer as a land of endless prosperity, with merchants living the high life in their mud-brick villas. But the reality was far more stratified. The elite, the priests, the nobles, and the royals lived in opulence, their wealth built on the backs of the laboring masses. For most traders, life was a constant balancing act of making enough to get by while hoping for that one big score. The gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the Euphrates itself. The ziggurats might have been towering symbols of human achievement, but they were also stark reminders of the social hierarchy. The priests who ran these temples wielded immense power, both spiritual and economic. They controlled vast tracts of land and the resources that came with it. Meanwhile, traders like you were left to hustle and haggle in the shadow of these colossal structures. And yet, despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Sumerian society thrived. It was a world of contrasts, where the sacred and the secular coexisted in a delicate dance. The marketplace was the heart of this society, a place where fortunes could change with the roll of a clay tablet. It was a place of opportunity and risk, where every transaction was a step into the unknown. As you reflect on all this, with the night settling in and the gentle lapping of the Euphrates in the background, you realize that you're part of something much larger than yourself. The river of commerce carries you along, through the triumphs and the tribulations, the myths and the realities. You're not just a trader in Sumer. You're a witness to the unfolding story of human civilization, with all its splendor and all its flaws. So, as you prepare to rest and recharge for another day in the bustling world of Sumerian trade, you know that the adventure is far from over. There are more deals to be struck, more laws to navigate, and more stories to tell. Because in this ancient land, where the past and the present are as intertwined as your sandal straps, the saga of trade, and of the human spirit, marches ever onward. As the stars twinkle above, and you drift towards a well-deserved rest, your evening takes a detour to the home of a fellow merchant. Picture this, a feast that's less about quantity and more about cultural currency. Here, trade isn't just about goods. It's about ideas, stories, and identities mingling like spices in a tagine. The flickering oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the mud-brick walls, while the aroma of roasted lamb and barley stew fills the air. This isn't just a meal. It's a symposium of sorts, where the day's hustle unwinds into tales of far-off lands and mythical heroes. Your host, a trader with connections as wide as the Euphrates itself, has just returned from a journey to Dilmun, modern-day Bahrain. He regales the gathering with tales of seashells traded like gold and the sweet, intoxicating scent of frankincense wafting through the bustling markets. The talk turns to the epic of Gilgamesh, that ancient blockbuster which may as well be the Sumerian equivalent of Netflix's greatest hits. This story of kings and gods, love and loss, has traveled farther than any caravan, seeping into the cultural fabric of every civilization it touches. It's a tale that's as enduring as the ziggurat and as captivating as the moonlit Euphrates. And then there's the writing. Cuneiform, that wedge-shaped script etched into clay tablets, is more than just administrative chatter. It's a record of human thought, a technology that others, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, will eagerly adopt, adapting it to their own tongues and tales. This script is the internet of the ancient world, an information highway connecting city-states and cultures. Here, in the midst of Sumer's vibrant social scene, you realize that writing isn't just for the scribes hunched over their clay tablets. It's a tool of power, shaping identities, sealing treaties, and spreading stories like wildfire. As the feast continues, you reflect on the legacy of these exchanges. Sumer may not have had skyscrapers, but its influence towers over the ages. Its trade networks, like the sinews of a giant beast, stretch far and wide, linking disparate cultures in a web of commerce and communication. It's a legacy that future empires, from the Babylonians to the Persians, will inherit and expand upon. The hustle of trade is the lifeblood of civilization, and Sumer is its beating heart. But let's not get carried away by romantic notions of antiquity. The reality is that this world, like ours, is full of contradictions. The same trade routes that bring prosperity also bring conflict. The same myths that inspire can also be tools of control. Yet, through it all, the human spirit remains unyielding, driven by curiosity and ambition. As the night deepens and the conversations become a gentle murmur, you find yourself contemplating the nature of legacy. While the mud-brick walls of Ur may crumble, and the Euphrates may change course, the essence of trade, the exchange of ideas and goods, the forging of connections, remains timeless. It's a tale as old as civilization itself, where the players may change, but the stage remains the same. In this ancient world, where the past and present are as intertwined as the strands of a braided river, you realize that the story of Sumer isn't just history. It's a mirror reflecting human nature, with all its triumphs and tribulations. As you prepare to rest, you know that tomorrow you'll rise to the same hustle, the same dance of commerce and culture. And in the rhythms of this ancient land, you find a story that never truly ends, but continues to unfold with each new day. In the quiet valleys and rugged mountains of early medieval Japan, the samurai began their ascent from provincial obscurity to the country's most revered warriors. They weren't always the polished icons of honor and discipline that samurai cinema might have you believe. Nope, these folks started out as something more akin to a medieval bouncer mixed with an IRS agent, minus the tax forms and plus a hefty dose of swordplay. The Heian period, from 794 to 1185, was the crucible in which these armored figures were forged, and their rise tells us a lot about the chaotic stew of politics, economics, and sheer necessity that defined this era. Now, let's get one thing straight. The samurai didn't saunter into existence with shiny armor and a well-thumbed copy of the Bushido Code under their belts. These guys emerged from the countryside, a place where life was about as glamorous as a muddy rice paddy. The Japanese emperor at the time, more interested in poetry than politics, had a hard time keeping the provinces in check. With the capital, Kyoto, sitting pretty in its imperial elegance, the countryside was left to fend for itself, a bit like a forgotten sock at the back of a drawer. Enter the samurai, the muscle needed to protect landowners and collect taxes. And by collect taxes, I mean they were the ones knocking on doors with a sword in one hand and a not-so-friendly reminder in the other. Economically, Japan's rural zones were the Wild West of their day, minus the tumbleweeds and 10-gallon hats. Land was power, and power needed protection. The wealthy landowners, or daimyo, had sprawling estates to defend, and they needed someone who knew their way around a katana. Rather than relying on the sluggish imperial army, they turned to local warriors who knew the land better than anyone. These early samurai were less about Zen meditation and more about ensuring that the rice harvest didn't end up in someone else's granary. And let's talk fashion, because nothing screams, I mean business, like a suit of armor so intricate that it could double as a jigsaw puzzle. The classic samurai armor, or yoroi, might look formidable, but it was also a practical choice. If your idea of practicality involves a helmet with horns and a face mask that could give nightmares to a Halloween enthusiast. The armor was made of lacquered metal and leather, designed to deflect arrows and the occasional wayward spear. It was functional, sure, but comfort was not its strong suit. Imagine wearing a metal corset that weighs as much as a small child while trying to wield a sword longer than your average broomstick. Not exactly the stuff of leisure wear. But here's where the story takes a twist. While samurai are often portrayed as the ultimate clean-cut warriors, hygiene was not high on the priority list. Baths were less frequent than battles, and the layers of armor didn't exactly breathe well. Add in the fact that the medieval Japanese diet was heavy on fish and fermented soybeans, and you can imagine that a samurai's presence was detectable even before they entered a room. It's a wonder they didn't win battles by sheer olfactory assault. As the samurai class solidified, something else was brewing in the background, the shogunate. The political landscape of Japan was shifting like sand underfoot, and the emperor's grip on power was slipping. Cue the rise of the shogun, the military dictator who would eventually hold the real power in Japan. But before we get there, let's pause to poke a few holes in the legend of Bushido. This so-called code of honor is often presented as a samurai's guiding star, a moral compass pointing true north. In reality, it was more like an IKEA instruction manual, open to interpretation and often missing key pieces. Take, for example, the delightful practice of seppuku, or ritual suicide. While it's painted as the ultimate act of honor, it was also a handy way to avoid the consequences of failure. Mess up a mission, no problem. Just disembowel yourself and save face. It's hard not to see the pragmatic side of a code that includes your own demise as a viable career move. And then there was the art of the ambush, a favorite tactic of the samurai. Forget fair fights. These guys were all about strategic advantage. They'd hide in the bushes or under the cover of night, ready to pounce on unsuspecting foes. Honor in combat was less about a duel at dawn, and more about ensuring you lived to see another day, preferably with your head still attached. In the grand tapestry of history, the samurai's rise was anything but straightforward. They were a product of their time, shaped by the tumultuous forces of feudal Japan. From humble beginnings as rural enforcers to the elite military nobility, their journey is a testament to the power of adaptation. As we continue to explore their world, keep an eye out for the contradictions and complexities that make these warriors more than just mythic figures. Because in the end, the real stories are always more interesting than the legends. With the samurai star firmly on the rise, Japan was on the brink of a seismic shift in power dynamics. Enter the Kamakura period, beginning in 1185, and named after its coastal headquarters, where intrigue and betrayal were daily fare, and family feuds could rival any modern soap opera. At the heart of this turbulent era was Minamoto no Yoritomo, the man who would become Japan's first shogun in 1192 and change the course of its history. Yoritomo wasn't just a man with a plan. He was a man with a vendetta. His initial rise to power was fueled by a blood feud with the Terror clan, a rivalry so intense that it made Hatfields and McCoys look like a friendly neighborhood spat. Yoritomo's ascent wasn't just about battles and bloodshed, though there was plenty of that. It was about political chess played on a board where each piece carried a sword and a grudge. After the Genpei War, which saw the Minamoto clan emerge victorious over the Terror in 1185, Japan was left with a power vacuum. The emperor, figure more ornamental than operational, was perched in Kyoto scribbling poetry, while the real work of governance was up for grabs. And grab it, Yoritomo did. With a deft combination of military might and Machiavellian maneuvering, he secured his position as shogun, a title that translated to barbarian-quelling generalissimo. Because why settle for a plain old general when you can be a generalissimo, right? Running a shogunate was no small feat, and Yoritomo's new regime came with its own set of logistical headaches. Think of it as launching a startup, but instead of coding and coffee runs, you're dealing with samurai payroll and rice harvest quotas. Maintaining a samurai army was an expensive affair. Arming a single samurai could cost the equivalent of several years' worth of rice production. The armor alone, a heady mix of lacquered metal and intricate lacing, was a small fortune, not to mention the swords, which were as much about craftsmanship as they were about combat. Yoritomo had to ensure his warriors were well equipped and well fed, a challenge when your currency is essentially edible. But let's not forget the ceremonial side of things, which often veered into the absurd. The shogunate was steeped in rituals that made the British monarchy look like a minimalist affair. From elaborate tea ceremonies to the precise folding of a warrior's kimono, the customs were as intricate as a samurai's topknot. These rituals were meant to reinforce loyalty and status, but they could also be a colossal time waster. Picture a samurai spending hours perfecting the art of incense appreciation when there were actual battles to be fought. It's a wonder they found any time to govern at all. The myth of the samurai as paragons of loyalty and honor is one of history's most enduring tales, but the reality was often more pragmatic than poetic. Loyalty in the samurai class was less about unwavering devotion and more about a calculated alliance. A samurai's allegiance was typically to whoever could offer the most land, gold, or power, whichever came first. This transactional loyalty meant that betrayals were as common as cherry blossoms in spring. Take the famous case of Kajiwara Kagetoki, once a trusted retainer of Yoritomo. Kagetoki switched sides more often than a double agent in a spy thriller, ultimately meeting his end because of his opportunistic tendencies. Even the legendary Bushido Code, supposedly the samurai's moral guide, was more flexible than a gymnast. While it extolled virtues like bravery and loyalty, in practice, it was an elastic set of principles that could be stretched or discarded, depending on the situation. The code was less a manual for living and more a PR tool to justify actions that, in any other context, might be labeled as treacherous or downright ruthless. Yoritomo's establishment of the shogunate was a masterclass in political pragmatism. He knew that power wasn't just about wielding a sword, but also about knowing when to sheath it. His rule laid the groundwork for a new era where the shogun, not the emperor, was the ultimate authority. However, even Yoritomo's iron grip wasn't immune to the human penchant for drama and discord. His family, the Minamoto clan, was riddled with infighting that could have given Shakespeare material for a dozen plays. Yoritomo's death in 1199 left a power struggle that was as inevitable as it was chaotic. His sons, Yori and Sanetomo, were thrust into a political landscape as treacherous as any battlefield. Their reigns were short and marked by intrigue and assassination, proving that in the Game of Thrones, even blood ties weren't safe from the knife's edge. As we continue to unravel the threads of this tumultuous period, it's clear that the Kamakura shogunate was as much about navigating human nature as it was about martial might. The samurai and their leaders were not the infallible heroes of legend, but flawed, fascinating players in a historical drama that continues to captivate. In the grand theater of feudal Japan, the stage was set for more twists and turns, each more unexpected than the last. So, tighten your armor and keep your wits sharp. There's plenty more to uncover in the saga of the samurai and the shogunate. As the dust settled from the Kamakura shogunate's melodrama, Japan found itself ready for another round of political musical chairs, ushering in the Muromachi period. Buckle up, dear listener, because this era is where the plot thickens and the players multiply like feudal rabbits. Enter the Ashikaga shogunate, a regime with more twists and turns than a samurai sword blade, and the rise of the daimyo, those regional warlords who made Game of Thrones look like a tea party for toddlers. The Ashikaga clan, led by Ashikaga Takoji, took the reins in 1336 after decisively booting the Kamakura shogunate out of the game. Takoji, a man who could spot an opportunity from a mile away, was the kind of guy who'd see a power vacuum and think, that would look great with my name on it. With the emperor still lounging in Kyoto, more ceremonial than sovereign, Takoji established a new shogunate that was part military dictatorship, part reality TV show. The Ashikaga Shogunate, headquartered in the Muromachi district of Kyoto, was a political soap opera, complete with betrayals, backstabbing, and a cast of characters who'd switch allegiances faster than a samurai could draw his sword. Economically, Japan during the Muromachi period was undergoing its own revolution. As farming techniques improved and trade flourished, wealth started to flow into the provinces like sake at a samurai's banquet. This economic shift saw the rise of the daimyo, the regional warlords who controlled vast swaths of land and had armies of samurai on speed dial. Land was still the name of the game, and the daimyo played it like pros, their power growing in tandem with their rice fields. But with great power comes great chaos, and soon the stage was set for the Sengoku, or Warring States period, a time when peace was as rare as a sober samurai in a sake brewery. Now, let's talk about Zen Buddhism, because what's a samurai without a touch of spiritual contradiction? Zen, with its emphasis on meditation and inner peace, might seem at odds with the samurai's, shall we say, action-packed lifestyle. But here's the kicker. The samurai embraced Zen not just for its spiritual benefits, but because it was great for sharpening their focus and discipline, perfect for slicing through both enemies and existential angst. Imagine a warrior sitting in serene meditation one moment, then leaping into battle the next. It's like a monk with a mean streak, or a yoga instructor who's also a cage fighter. The romanticized image of the samurai as noble warriors devoted to their lords, and the Bushido code often glosses over their more opportunistic tendencies. These guys weren't above switching sides if the rice porridge was richer on the other side of the battlefield. Loyalty was negotiable, and honor had a price tag. In fact, the very word samurai originally meant those who serve, but in practice, it often meant those who serve themselves. The daimyo capitalized on this, offering land and gold to lure the best fighters to their banners. It was a seller's market for samurai skills, and daimyo were willing to pay top dollar, or rather, top koku, a unit of rice sufficient to feed one person for a year, to secure the sharpest blades. And speaking of contradictions, let's not forget the samurai's code of Bushido. While it preached virtues like loyalty, self-discipline, and honor, it was often more a guideline than a rulebook. Samurai were known to interpret Bushido with the flexibility of a contortionist in a yoga class. The code might demand a samurai commit seppuku to restore honor, but it didn't say much about double-crossing a lord if the reward was tempting enough. It's like a diet plan that recommends moderation, but doesn't frown upon the occasional binge. The Sengoku period, starting around 1467, saw Japan's political landscape become a chaotic jigsaw puzzle of competing daimyo, each trying to outmaneuver the others. Alliances were as fragile as a samurai's temper, and as fleeting as cherry blossoms in a spring breeze. The Anin War, 1467-1477, was the opening act of this century-long strife, a conflict so convoluted that historians still argue over who was fighting whom and why. It began as a succession dispute and quickly escalated into a full-blown civil war, turning Kyoto into a charred ghost town. The capital's devastation was a testament to the era's grim reality. Power struggles were as destructive as they were relentless. In this turbulent era, the daimyo wielded more power than the shogunate itself, which often felt like a figurehead in a leaky boat. The Ashikaga shogunate struggled to maintain control as its authority was as fragmented as a shattered katana. Meanwhile, the daimyo played a high-stakes game of territorial chess, capturing castles and land with the fervor of real estate moguls armed with armies instead of briefcases. It was during this time that some of the most famous castles in Japan were built, like the majestic Heimji Castle, a fortress designed to withstand sieges and make an architectural statement that screamed, "Come at me, bro." Despite the chaos, or perhaps because of it, the Sengoku period was also a time of great cultural flourishing. The samurai, for all their warrior ways, were patrons of the arts and architecture, and Zen Buddhism played a significant role in shaping their culture. The tea ceremony, with its emphasis on subtlety and simplicity, became a symbol of refined taste, a stark contrast to the bloody battles waged outside the teru. It's ironic, really, how a warrior could discuss the nuances of tea leaves one moment and then head off to lop off a few heads the next. It was like having Picasso painting serene landscapes in the morning and wrestling alligators by afternoon. As we navigate this era of feudal Japan, it's crucial to remember that the stories of samurai and shoguns are more than just tales of honor and heroism. They're about power, survival, and the intricate dance of politics and warfare. The samurai were not just warriors bound by a moral code. They were human beings, flawed, ambitious, and as prone to self-interest as any other group in history. The Muromachi period, with its layers of complexity and contradiction, offers a window into a world where the sword and the scroll coexisted, and where the line between legend and reality was as blurred as a battlefield at dusk. So, as we continue this journey through Japan's tumultuous past, keep your armor tight and your curiosity sharper. The saga of the samurai and the shogunate is far from over, and the next chapters promise even more intrigue, ambition, and the occasional unexpected twist. Stay tuned, because in the theater of history, the curtain has only just begun to rise. As the curtains of history begin to part on the next act, we're greeted by a trio of power players whose combined efforts would reshape Japan in ways the scriptwriters of destiny could only dream of. Enter Oda Nobunaga, the man who kicked off the unification game with all the subtlety of a cannonball in a koi pond. Born in 1534, Nobunaga was the kind of leader who didn't just march to the beat of his own drum. He strapped that drum to a warhorse and rode it into battle. By the time he was done, he'd laid the groundwork for what would become the Edo period, though not without a few scorched earth policies and betrayals that would make a Shakespearean villain blush. Nobunaga's approach to unification was less about gentle persuasion and more about subduing his opponents with a mix of military innovation and sheer audacity. He was the guy who looked at traditional samurai warfare and thought, what if we threw in some muskets for fun? And so, at the Battle of Nagashino in 1575, famously deployed 3 000 arquebusiers in rotating volleys, demolishing the cavalry charges of the Taikta clan with ruthless efficiency. That battle wasn't just a victory, it was a tech demo for the future of warfare. Nobunaga's knack for blending brute force with strategic brilliance made him a formidable force, until his life was cut short in 1582 by the betrayal of one of his own generals, Eiichai Mitsuhide, who decided that stabbing his boss in the back was a great way to start the week. With Nobunaga's untimely exit, the stage was set for his former sandal-bearer turned right-hand man, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, to step into the spotlight. Born in 1537 to a humble foot soldier, Hideyoshi wasn't your typical candidate for leadership. He was more of a rags-to-riches story with an extra helping of cunning. If Nobunaga was the hammer, Hideyoshi was the velvet glove. He continued the unification of Japan with a mix of diplomacy, marriage alliances, and the occasional military smackdown. By 1590, Hideyoshi had managed to bring the entirety of Japan under his control, a feat that was about as easy as herding cats through a field of catnip. Hideyoshi's reign saw the imposition of a strict class hierarchy that would cement the social order for years to come. He instigated a sword hunt in 1588, effectively disarming the peasantry and ensuring that the samurai were the only ones allowed to carry weapons. The goal was to prevent uprisings and maintain control, but in reality, it was like telling a room full of toddlers that only one of them gets a treat. The samurai were happy, but everyone else, not so much. And let's not forget Hideyoshi's failed attempts at expanding his influence beyond Japan's shores. His invasions of Korea in the 1590 were disastrous. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a business venture gone wrong, complete with massive losses and international embarrassment. After Hideyoshi's death in 1598, the power vacuum didn't just suck in the usual suspects. It created a political maelstrom. Enter Tokugawa Ieyasu, the man with a patience level that could outlast a geological epoch. Born in 1543, Ieyasu was the kind of leader who knew the value of waiting for the perfect moment. In 1600, he seized that moment at the Battle of Sekigahara, a clash involving over 160 000 troops that decided the fate of Japan. With a decisive victory over the Western coalition, Ieyasu established the Tokugawa shogunate in 1603, marking the beginning of the Edo period. This was a time of relative peace, prosperity, and predictably, an overabundance of rules. The Tokugawa shogunate quickly became known for its rigid social order and isolationist policies. Japan closed its doors to the outside world, save for a few Dutch traders who were allowed to set up shop on the tiny island of Dejima. This self-imposed seclusion wasn't just about keeping foreign influences at bay. It was about maintaining control over a society that was as stratified as a milfoil pastry. The social hierarchy was as complex as it was stifling, with everyone knowing their place in the grand scheme of things, from the emperor, who was still more symbol than sovereign, down to the lowliest peasant. The samurai, once the sword-swinging heroes of the battlefield, found themselves with little to do but twiddle their thumbs and manage estates. Many transitioned from warriors to bureaucrats, a shift that was about as exciting as watching paint dry. Imagine being trained for years as a fighter, only to end up balancing ledgers and overseeing rice shipments. It's like hiring a lion to guard the lettuce. Overkill doesn't even begin to cover it. The samurai's new role involved adhering to a dizzying array of laws that dictated everything from clothing to hairstyles, ensuring that the rigid social order was maintained with all the joy of a tax audit. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the so-called peace of the Edo period. While it did boast almost 250 years without major warfare, it was also an era of stifling regulations and social stagnation. The romanticized image of peaceful Edo ignores the reality of a society bound by rules so bizarre they might as well have been penned by a committee of control freaks. Samurai were forbidden from engaging in commerce. Peasants couldn't wear silk, and the merchant class, despite amassing considerable wealth, was firmly placed at the bottom of the social totem pole. The Tokugawa system was a masterpiece of balance, if your idea of balance involves a tightrope over a pit of societal discontent. In this world of order and restraint, the samurai's Bushido code evolved, or rather, it was repurposed as a tool for maintaining discipline and hierarchy. The samurai became the moral exemplars, expected to embody virtues such as loyalty, honor, and self-discipline. Yet, in reality, the code was often more a decorative flourish than a guiding principle. It was the kind of moral compass you'd find at a novelty store, nice to look at, but not particularly reliable. The samurai, once the epitome of martial prowess, were now the enforcers of peace, ensuring that the wheels of Tokugawa's carefully orchestrated society turned smoothly, if not always happily. As we dive deeper into the Edo period, keep in mind that beneath the veneer of tranquility lay a society grappling with its own contradictions. The samurai, once the warriors of legend, now patrolled the borders of an isolationist nation, their swords sheathed and their tempers as tightly controlled as the laws they enforced. The Tokugawa shogunate's success in maintaining peace was undeniable, but it came at the cost of stifling creativity and social mobility. Stage was set for a society caught between the allure of its own legends and the harsh truths of its reality. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tangled web of the Edo period, where the stories of samurai and shoguns are as layered and complex as the history they created. The curtain hasn't fallen yet, and there are still plenty of tales to tell in this grand saga of power, control, and the occasional unexpected twist. As the sun set on the Edo period, Japan found itself on the brink of a cultural and political revolution that would make even the most seasoned samurai do a double take. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had ruled with an iron grip for over 250 years, was about to face a challenge that no amount of swordplay or bureaucratic maneuvering could fend off. Enter the Meiji Restoration, a whirlwind of change that would dismantle the feudal system and send the samurai packing, not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of modernization. The mid-19th century was a time when the winds of change weren't just metaphorical. They were carried on the steam-powered ships of Western powers knocking at Japan's door, demanding trade and cooperation at Cannon Point. The arrival of Commodore Matthew Perry and his black ships in 1853 was less a polite knock and more a battering ram to Japan's isolationist policies. Perry's fleet, with its smoke-belching steamers, was a wake-up call that the world had changed, while Japan was busy perfecting its tea ceremonies and sumo wrestling. Faced with the stark reality of Western industrial might, Japan's leaders had a decision to make: either adapt to the new global order or risk becoming the historical equivalent of a quaint, isolated island museum. The Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854, which opened up Japanese ports to American trade, was the first crack in the shogunate's armor. It signaled the beginning of the end for the Tokugawa regime, which had long been resistant to change, preferring to keep foreign influences as far away as possible, ideally somewhere in another ocean. Economically, Japan was a patchwork quilt of outdated practices and inefficient structures. The rigid class system, which had once been the backbone of Tokugawa stability, now a hindrance in an era that demanded flexibility and innovation. The samurai, who had once been the elite enforcers of the shogunate, found themselves unemployed and struggling to adapt. With the abolition of their stipends, many samurai were left to wander the streets or take up mundane jobs, a far cry from their days of glory on the battlefield. Their swords were no longer the tools of power, but relics of a bygone age, as useful as a teapot in a thunderstorm. The Meiji Restoration, beginning in 1868, was Japan's answer to these challenges. It was a period marked by rapid modernization and westernization, as the country sought to catch up with the industrialized nations that had been making demands at its doorstep. The new Meiji government implemented sweeping reforms that dismantled the feudal system, promoted industrialization, and established a centralized, constitutional government. Land reforms redistributed property, and the economy shifted from rice-based to cash-based, encouraging entrepreneurship and industrial growth. The fall of the shogunate was as much a story of economic necessity as it was of political revolution. The new government recognized that to compete on the world stage, Japan needed to embrace technology and innovation. Railways, telegraphs, and modern factories sprang up seemingly overnight, transforming the landscape from feudal fields to industrial hubs. The Japanese embraced the Western model with a fervor that would have made even the most ardent Anglophile blush. By the end of the 19th century, Japan had not only caught up with the West, but had begun to assert itself as a regional power. Yet, even as Japan surged into the modern age, the allure of the samurai and the shogunate persisted. The romantic image of the samurai, noble warriors bound by honor and duty, continued to captivate imaginations long after their swords had been sheathed for good. But the reality was far more complex. The samurai were as much products of their time as they were victims of it, caught between the romantic ideals of Bushido and the harsh truths of survival in a rapidly changing world. So why does the myth of the samurai endure? Perhaps it's because their story is one of timeless appeal, a narrative of courage, loyalty, and the struggle to find one's place in a world that often seems indifferent to such virtues. The samurai represent an archetype that resonates across cultures and centuries. The warrior poet, the noble knight, the Ronin who walks a solitary path. In the world of popular culture, the samurai's legacy is alive and well, thriving in everything from Akira, Kurosawa's cinematic masterpieces, to video games like Ghost of Tsushima. These modern interpretations may gloss over the less savory aspects of samurai life, like the opportunistic side-switching and the occasional bout of strategic treachery, but they capture the essence of a warrior ethos that continues to inspire. And let's not forget the samurai's enduring influence on fashion and style. Who would have guessed that a top knot and a kimono could still turn heads in the 21st century? The samurai aesthetic has been reimagined countless times, from haute couture runways to streetwear collections, proving that some styles truly are timeless. As we wrap up our journey through the annals of feudal Japan, it's clear that the stories of samurai and shoguns are more than just tales of swords and battles. They're a window into a world that was as complex as it was captivating, a world where the line between legend and reality was as thin as a samurai's blade. So next time you watch a samurai film or pick up a katana-inspired umbrella, remember the real history behind the myth, the human stories of ambition, survival, and adaptation that continue to echo through the ages. In the end, the rise and fall of the samurai and the shogunate remind us that history is a grand tapestry woven from the threads of both myth and reality. It's a story of power and politics, of cultural evolution, and economic necessity, and of the enduring human desire to find meaning in the past. So here's to the samurai. May their legends live on, even as we continue to uncover the truths behind the armor. Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst was one of those kids you'd never have pegged as future royalty. Think more awkward school play understudy than crown-wearing empress. But history loves a plot twist, and boy, did she deliver. Born in 1729 in Stettin, Prussia, now Szczecin, Poland, Sophie was the daughter of a minor German prince and a mother who moonlighted as a relentless matchmaker. In a Europe swirling with power plays and political marriages, Sophie was a small pawn on a giant chessboard. But don't let her humble beginnings fool you. She was destined for bigger things, even if it meant rebranding herself as Catherine the Great along the way. Now, picture 18th century Europe. It's a place of powdered wigs, corsets that could double as torture devices, and an endless game of thrones. Countries were busy swapping territories like they were trading Parkhamen cards, and in the midst of all this chaos, little Sophie was getting a crash course in survival. Her mother, Johanna, was the ultimate stage mom, putting Kris Jenner to shame. She was determined to marry Sophie off to someone, anyone, with a title and a decent estate. Her matchmaking zeal even found its way into Sophie's daily routine, treating her education like a royal dating profile. Instead of like long walks on the beach, it was more like fluent in French, loves reading Voltaire, and can curtsy like nobody's business. But let's talk about her Russian obsession. As a teenager, Sophie developed what can only be described as a fangirl-level enthusiasm for the Russian language and culture. She was like a kid who discovers K-pop and suddenly needs to learn Korean immediately. At one point, she was sneaking in Russian grammar under the covers with a candle like it was contraband. Her mother, ever the pragmatist, probably just saw it as another string in her matchmaking bow, because Russia was the big leagues, and she had her sights set on getting Sophie into that court. Enter Peter Roman III, heir to the Russian throne, and about as charismatic as a damp sponge. He was her cousin, because royal bloodlines were kept tighter than a drum back then, and he was the ticket Sophie needed to upgrade from her minor German princedom to the Russian Empire. Of course, Peter was also known for his love of toy soldiers and his questionable grasp on reality, a combination that probably didn't make him the most promising match. But when you're playing the game of dynastic politics, it's less about finding love and more about not losing your head. The political landscape Sophie was stepping into was a minefield. Russia was ruled by Empress Elizabeth, Peter's aunt, who had no children of her own. This meant Peter was the heir apparent, and Sophie's marriage to him in 1745 was a strategic move orchestrated by Elizabeth herself. The wedding was more a merger than a marriage, a way to secure the succession and keep the power within the family. Sophie, ever the astute observer, realized early on that she'd have to play the long game if she wanted to survive, let alone thrive. Sophie's early days in Russia were a masterclass in adapting to new environments. She converted to Russian orthodoxy, ditching her Protestant roots faster than you can say political expediency, and took the name Catherine. It was a calculated move, signaling her commitment to her new homeland, even if her heart was still somewhere in the libraries of Europe, where Voltaire reigned supreme. Her transformation into Catherine wasn't just lip service. It was a full-blown rebranding campaign. She learned to navigate the labyrinthine court politics, forming alliances and quietly taking notes on who was who. Meanwhile, Peter was more interested in his toy soldiers than his new wife, leaving Catherine plenty of time to scheme. Court life was a bizarre mix of opulence and absurdity. Imagine gilded ballrooms, endless banquets, and more gossip than a high school cafeteria. Catherine's charm and intelligence quickly won her allies, but she was also acutely aware that she was playing on borrowed time. Elizabeth's health was declining, and Peter's ascension seemed inevitable. Catherine had to be ready, and if that meant cozying up to the Russian nobility and perfecting her Russian accent, so be it. Despite the political intrigue, Catherine's early years in Russia weren't without their humorous moments. She reportedly practiced her Russian pronunciation until her cheeks ached, determined not to sound like a foreigner. Her tenacity earned her the respect of the court, even as her marriage to Peter began to show cracks. Peter, more interested in Prussian military tactics than Russian politics, was proving to be as much of a liability as an asset. Catherine, however, was biding her time. waiting for the right moment to make her move. Her mother's matchmaking had landed her in the Russian court, but it was Catherine's own cunning that would secure her future. She watched and waited, learning everything she could about the intricacies of Russian power dynamics. It was a high-stakes game, and Catherine was determined not to be a pawn forever. Little did anyone know, this German princess with a penchant for Russian grammar would soon outmaneuver them all, rewriting history as Catherine the Great. Catherine, ever the strategist, was biding her time like a chess player eyeing the board, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The year was 1762, and the Russian court was a powder keg ready to ignite. Picture Peter Roman III, her husband, finally on the throne after Elizabeth's death. His reign, well, it was as short as a TikTok video, lasting a mere 6 months. This guy was like a masterclass in how not to rule, alienating the Russian nobility faster than you can say vodka. Peter was more into Prussian military uniforms than Russian politics, and that, my friends, was a big no-no. Enter Grigory Orlov, Catherine's dashing lover, and a key player in her coup. This man wasn't just a pretty face. He came with a whole squad of brothers who were officers in the Russian army. Talk about dating your way to success. Catherine and Orlov cooked up a plan that was as bold as it was brilliant. On July 9, 1762, with the help of the Orlov brothers and a handful of loyal guards, Catherine seized power in a bloodless coup that was smoother than a perfectly brewed cup of tea. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. Catherine's rise to power wasn't some Cinderella story with glass slippers and fairy godmothers. It was ruthless, calculated, and entirely necessary given the political climate. Russia was a mess, economically and socially. The treasury was leaking money faster than a sieve, with debts mounting like a stack of unpaid parking tickets. Peter's policies had alienated the military and the nobility, who were about as impressed with his leadership as a cat is with a bath. Catherine, however, was no amateur. She understood that to stabilize the empire, she needed to win over not just the nobility, but the common folk too. Her early reforms were focused on restoring stability and confidence in the government. She took a pragmatic approach, recognizing the importance of strengthening Russia's military prowess and expanding its cultural influence. While Peter had been busy playing soldier, Catherine was rallying real ones. One of her first moves was to re-establish the Senate's power, which Peter had, in his infinite wisdom, effectively neutered. She reformed the administrative structures, ensuring that the government could actually govern. What a novel idea. Catherine also sought to modernize the Russian economy, encouraging the development of new industries and supporting agricultural improvements. Under her leadership, the Russian Empire would start its journey toward becoming a European powerhouse, much to the chagrin of her Western counterparts. Now, let's tackle some myths. The romanticized version of Catherine's accession paints her as a benevolent liberator who was adored by all. In reality, her coup was met with a mix of relief and skepticism. While she was certainly more popular than Peter, hard not to be when your competition is that guy, she still faced significant opposition. The Russian court was a snake pit of intrigue, and Catherine had to keep her wits about her to stay on top. And what about Peter, you ask? His fall from grace was as spectacular as it was swift. He was forced to abdicate and was subsequently imprisoned in a relatively cushy manner at Rapture Palace. But here's where things get murky. Peter died shortly after his abdication under suspicious circumstances. Officially, it was a hemorrhoidal colic, which sounds about as believable as blaming your dog for eating your homework. Rumors swirled about foul play, with many suspecting that Catherine had a hand in his demise. While the truth remains elusive, one thing is clear. Catherine was not about to let her hard-won throne slip away. The economic and social upheaval of Russia at the time cannot be overstated. The empire was in dire need of reform, and Catherine's early years as empress were spent navigating this turbulent landscape. She knew that to maintain her grip on power, she needed to present herself as a competent and capable ruler. Her reforms were not just about solidifying her rule, but also about ensuring the longevity of the Russian state. Catherine's efforts to modernize Russia were ambitious. She encouraged foreign investment, understanding that economic growth was essential for stability. She also promoted education and the arts, believing that a cultured society was a stable one. This was no small feat in a country where serfdom was still the norm and literacy rates were abysmally low. But Catherine was nothing if not determined, and her vision for Russia was one of progress and enlightenment. In debunking the myths around Catherine's rise, it's important to remember that history is rarely as black and white as we might like it to be. Her story is one of ambition, cunning, and resilience. She wasn't the fairy tale empress of legend, nor was she a villainous usurper. Catherine was a complex figure navigating a complex world, and her legacy is a testament to her ability to adapt and thrive in the face of adversity. As we leave Catherine, newly crowned and poised to reshape Russia, it's clear that her journey is far from over. Her reign will be marked by both triumph and turmoil, as she sought to leave her indelible mark on the Russian Empire. Stay tuned, dear listener, because Catherine the Great's story is just warming up, and trust me, things are about to get even more intriguing. As Catherine settled into her new role as Empress, she found herself straddling the line between visionary reformer and, let's be honest, a bit of a control freak, what she liked to call an enlightened despot. This was the 18th century, after all, where you could be both a bookworm and a benevolent dictator without batting an eye. Picture her at her desk, quill in hand, scribbling away as she corresponded with some of the greatest minds of the Enlightenment, like Voltaire. Yes, that's right, Voltaire. Because when you're reshaping an empire, why not have a French philosopher on speed dial? Catherine was all about modernizing Russia, and she had the receipts to prove it. One of her bold moves was founding the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens in 1764. This was the first state-funded institution for women's education in Russia, and it wasn't just about teaching girls to embroider or manage a household budget. Catherine wanted to create a new generation of educated women who could hold their own in a salon or a debate. The curriculum included subjects like mathematics, science, and philosophy, because why should men have all the fun with Euclid and Aristotle? The Smolny Institute was as much a political statement as it was an educational one. Catherine was sending a clear message. Russia was stepping onto the world stage, and its women would be part of the show. But let's not romanticize this too much. While Catherine was keen on education, the reality was that the Smolny Institute was primarily for noble girls. For the serfs, who made up about 90% of the population, education was still as elusive as a unicorn. Nevertheless, the Institute symbolized a shift towards a more enlightened society, even if it was just the aristocratic tip of the iceberg. Now let's talk about Catherine's pen pal, Voltaire. Imagine the letters flying back and forth, Voltaire waxing lyrical about the virtues of reason and Catherine nodding along, quill ready, as she planned her next move. Their correspondence was a meeting of minds, but it also highlighted the comedic friction between Catherine's high-minded ideals and Russian reality. Voltaire was all about liberty and progress, while Catherine, ruling over an autocracy, had to balance those ideals with the harsh truths of governing a sprawling empire. It was like trying to drive a carriage with one wheel in the Enlightenment and the other stuck in feudal mud. Catherine's ambitions for reform often collided headlong with the economic and social realities of her time. Her educational endeavors and cultural projects weren't cheap, and funding them was a bit like trying to furnish a palace on a peasant's budget. The Russian treasury was like a leaky bucket, and Catherine had to get creative. She offered tax incentives for industrial development and encouraged foreign investment, hoping that a more robust economy would eventually foot the bill for her grand visions. But let's get back to those ideals of enlightenment. Catherine was determined to drag Russia, kicking and screaming if necessary, into the age of enlightenment. Her court became a haven for artists, writers, and scientists, a Russian version of the French salons where ideas flowed as freely as the vodka. She even attempted to codify Russian laws into something resembling a modern legal system, drawing inspiration from Montesquieu and Beccaria. Yet the task was as Herculean as it sounds, and her attempts, while valiant, often ended up as more of a patchwork than a complete overhaul. Now, you might be thinking, wasn't Catherine just another autocrat with a penchant for power? And sure, she had a tight grip on the reins of authority, but she genuinely believed in spreading knowledge and culture. Her reign saw the establishment of new schools and the expansion of the arts, with theaters and opera houses popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. She even founded the Hermitage Museum, which started as her personal collection and grew into one of the largest and most prestigious museums in the world. Talk about a legacy. Catherine's push for enlightenment wasn't without its critics. Her detractors were quick to point out the disconnect between her progressive policies and the oppressive reality of serfdom, which was still very much alive and kicking. Serfs were bound to their land like barnacles to a ship, and while Catherine toyed with the idea of reforming serfdom, the economic and political costs made it a bridge too far. Her reforms were a bit like putting a fresh coat of paint on a crumbling wall. It looked good from a distance, but up close, the cracks were all too visible. Financially, Catherine's cultural projects and educational reforms were a significant drain on the state's coffers. While she encouraged the development of new industries and sought to boost trade, the economic benefits were slow to materialize, and the costs often outweighed the gains. Her initiatives were ambitious, but they were also a gamble, one that required careful balancing of the books and a touch of imperial sleight of hand. Despite these challenges, Catherine's reign was a period of cultural blossoming. She was a patron of the arts, and her court became a magnet for talent from across Europe. The Russian Enlightenment was in full swing, and Catherine was at the helm, steering the ship through turbulent waters with a steady hand and a keen eye for opportunity. Her correspondence with the likes of Voltaire wasn't just about exchanging pleasantries. It was a reflection of her commitment to fostering a culture of intellectual and artistic growth. In the end, Catherine the Great was a ruler of contradictions. She was a champion of Enlightenment ideals, yet she ruled with an iron fist. She was a patron of the arts, yet her economic policies often strained the empire's finances. She was an advocate for education, yet the vast majority of her subjects remained uneducated and impoverished. Her legacy is a complex tapestry of ambition, intellect, and pragmatism, woven together with the threads of history. As we leave Catherine amidst her whirlwind of reforms and cultural achievements, it's clear that her story is far from over. Her reign would continue to shape the Russian Empire, leaving a mark that would endure long after her time. So stay tuned, because Catherine's tale has more twists and turns than a Russian folk dance, and we're just getting started. With Catherine's cultural fiesta in full swing, let's shift our gaze toward the chessboard of foreign policy, where she played masterfully. Her reign wasn't just about art and education. It was a geopolitical game of risk, with Catherine as the undefeated champion. In 1783, she made her boldest move yet by annexing Crimea, a strategic gem she snatched like a seasoned pickpocket in a crowded bazaar. Now, Crimea wasn't just a sunny peninsula with nice beaches and good wine. It was the key to Black Sea dominance, a warm water port that Russia had coveted like a kid eyeing the last cookie in the jar. The annexation wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. It was the culmination of a long, calculated campaign to expand Russian influence and secure her empire's southern flank. This wasn't just about territory. It was about asserting power and sending a message to her European peers. Russia was a force to be reckoned with. But let's not sugarcoat the economic strain this put on Russia. The military campaigns leading up to the annexation were costly, with expenses piling up faster than a teenager's phone bill. Estimates suggest that these military endeavors put a significant dent in the Russian treasury. Yet Catherine was playing the long game. She believed that controlling Crimea would eventually pay dividends by boosting trade and securing Russia's naval presence in the Black Sea. Of course, this bold expansion didn't sit well with everyone. The Ottoman Empire, who had once controlled Crimea, was less than thrilled about losing such a strategic prize. But Catherine, ever the diplomat, managed to keep the fallout relatively contained. Her cunning negotiations and alliances kept the Ottomans at bay, and she shrewdly maneuvered the European powers to avoid any united front against her. She was like a grandmaster at a chessboard, always thinking several moves ahead. Speaking of grandmasters, let's talk about the partitioning of Poland, a geopolitical buffet where Catherine got more than her fair share of the spoils. Poland had been declining for a while, embroiled in internal chaos and political paralysis that made it ripe for picking. Alongside Prussia and Austria, Catherine participated in 3 partitions between 1772 and 1795, carving up the territory like it was Thanksgiving turkey. By the end of it, Poland vanished from the map entirely, and Catherine's slice of the pie expanded Russia's borders significantly. This wasn't just a land grab. It was a strategic coup that consolidated Russian power in Eastern Europe. However, let's not overlook the dark side. Poland's partitions were a diplomatic disaster for the Poles, whose sovereignty was shredded like confetti. Catherine's role was less benevolent empress and more Machiavellian strategist, proving that even enlightened despots have sharp claws. But how did she sell these expansions back home, into the infamous Potemkin villages, a term that has become shorthand for elaborate facades masking less than perfect realities? The story goes that Grigory Potemkin, Catherine's lover and trusted advisor, created fake settlements along the Dnieper River to impress her during a royal tour. It's said that he erected these villages to make Crimea look more developed and prosperous than it actually was. Whether this tale is entirely true or exaggerated, it highlights Potemkin's flair for theatricality and Catherine's knack for propaganda. The myth persists because it captures the essence of Catherine's reign, a blend of genuine progress and carefully crafted image. On the international front, Catherine's diplomatic maneuvers were as impressive as her territorial gains. She had a knack for manipulating European monarchs with the finesse of a seasoned poker player, bluffing and bargaining her way to favorable outcomes. Her correspondence with Frederick the Great of Prussia, for example, was a masterclass in balancing flattery and firm resolve. Catherine knew when to play nice and when to stand her ground, ensuring that Russia's interests were always at the forefront. Yet, let's not forget the economic toll of her military campaigns. Catherine's aggressive expansionism came with a hefty price tag. Funding armies and maintaining new territories required resources that strained Russia's finances. The annexation of Crimea and the partitioning of Poland might have expanded the empire, but they also left it grappling with economic challenges that would persist long after. Her reign was a balancing act between ambition and pragmatism, with Catherine walking the tightrope of empire building with remarkable skill. Critics of her military campaigns often point to the human cost: soldiers lost, resources depleted, and tensions heightened across Europe. While her conquests cemented Russia's status as a major power, they also sowed the seeds of future conflicts. The empire's expansion was not without its growing pains, and the strains on the treasury were a constant reminder that Catherine's ambitions came with significant risks. Yet, despite these challenges, Catherine's reign transformed Russia into a formidable player on the world stage. Her foreign policy was a testament to her strategic acumen, and her ability to navigate the complex web of European politics was nothing short of impressive. She turned Russia into a heavyweight contender in the geopolitical arena, proving that even a German princess with a penchant for Russian grammar could outplay the best of them. As we wrap up this segment, it's clear that Catherine's story is far from over. Her reign would continue to shape the Russian Empire and influence global politics in ways that would echo through history. So, dear listener, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the legacy of one of history's most fascinating rulers. Catherine's tale is a tapestry of intrigue, ambition, and resilience, and there's more to unravel in the chapters ahead. Catherine the Great's legacy is a kaleidoscope of brilliance and controversy, much like her reign. As the dust settled on her territorial expansions, the world was left to grapple with the duality of her image: the enlightened empress who wielded power with a velvet glove and the autocrat with an iron fist. Her death in 1796 at the age of 67 marked the end of an era, but her influence would echo through the annals of history like the refrain of a haunting ballad. First, let's tackle the elephant, or rather, the horse, in the room. One of the most persistent and salacious myths about Catherine involves her alleged fondness for equines in a decidedly unroyal way. This infamous rumor, suggesting she died in a scandalous encounter with a horse, is about as believable as a fairy tale, yet it persists in the popular imagination. The truth is far less sensational, but no less intriguing. Catherine died of a stroke, a dignified end for a monarch who had spent decades defying expectations. This myth, while utterly false, speaks volumes about the fascination and fear inspired by powerful women throughout history, where their achievements are downplayed and their private lives are scrutinized with a magnifying glass. Catherine's true legacy, however, lies in her indelible impact on Russia's cultural and political landscape. Her reign was a balancing act between progressive reforms and the harsh reality of autocratic rule. Economically, she left Russia with a larger, more powerful military and an expanded empire, although these came at significant cost. The treasury's coffers were often as empty as a magician's hat, with debts accumulating due to her ambitious projects and military campaigns. Yet under her leadership, Russia's cultural capital soared. She transformed St. Petersburg into a beacon of the Enlightenment, attracting artists, architects, and scientists like moths to a flame. Politically, Catherine's legacy is equally complex. Her governance was a careful dance between innovation and tradition, where she flirted with Enlightenment ideas, but never fully committed to radical change. Her attempts to reform the legal system and modernize Russian institutions were progressive in theory, but often stymied by the entrenched power structures of the nobility and the reality of serfdom. Serfdom remained the Achilles heel of her reign. Despite her intellectual correspondence with Voltaire and Diderot, the oppressive system persisted, highlighting the chasm between her ideals and the political realities she faced. When Catherine passed the baton to her son, Paul I, Russia braced itself for a different style of leadership. Paul, who had been kept at arm's length from power during his mother's reign, was as different from Catherine as night from day. His rule was characterized by a stark departure from his mother's policies, filled with attempts to undo her legacy out of spite and insecurity. His reign, starting in 1796, was a mere 5-year whirlwind of erratic decisions and paranoia, ending abruptly with his assassination in 1801. In contrast to Catherine's pragmatic diplomacy and strategic foresight, Paul seemed to be on a mission to alienate everyone, from the nobility to the military, effectively setting the stage for his own downfall. Catherine's private life, often as captivating as her public one, remains a subject of endless speculation and intrigue. Her numerous romances, including notable figures like Grigory Potemkin, fueled gossip that would make any modern tabloid editor green with envy. Yet, these relationships were as much about politics as passion. Catherine wielded her personal connections with the same cunning she used in statecraft, leveraging them to secure her position and further her ambitions. Her ability to navigate the male-dominated world of politics with both charm and intellect set her apart, making her a formidable figure in the pantheon of history's rulers. The larger-than-life persona of Catherine the Great continues to captivate historians and storytellers alike. Her reign was a testament to the complexities of power, where ambition, intellect, and pragmatism intertwined in a narrative that was both inspiring and cautionary. She was a ruler who understood the power of image and myth, crafting her legacy with the precision of a master sculptor. Yet, the romanticized version of Catherine often overshadows the nuanced reality of her reign, a reality marked by both triumphs and limitations. In the grand tapestry of history, Catherine the Great's story is woven with threads of enlightenment and autocracy, progress and oppression, charisma and controversy. She was a monarch who dared to reimagine Russia's place in the world, steering it toward modernity while wrestling with the weight of tradition. Her legacy, like a fine Russian vodka, is both smooth and potent, leaving a lasting impression that lingers long after the final drop. As we draw this historical journey to a close, it's clear that Catherine the Great's impact on Russia and the world is as multifaceted as the woman herself. Her reign was a symphony of contradictions, a dance between light and shadow that continues to resonate through the corridors of time. And while myths and rumors may swirl around her like a perpetual storm, the truth of her legacy stands tall, a testament to the enduring allure of one of history's most captivating rulers.